the 7th century, that's when Muhammad and his band of thugs came down there to the West Coast with the Quran in one hand and a sword in another one. And they were forcibly converting the Israelites into that nonsense Islam. Yeah, I said it, nonsense Islam, because that's not what we were dealing with. That's the Arabs' religion. That's not what we were dealing with. And that was the decline of the Hebraic community over there in the west coast of Africa. And that was the forefront in the beginning of the slave trade. Yea, and what have ye to do with me, O Tyre and Zidon, and all the coast of Palestine? Tyre, Zidon, and the coast of Palestine, those are all ancient Africans that God is referring to. Will ye render me a recompense? And if ye recompense me, swiftly and speedily will I return your recompense upon your own head. Because ye have taken my silver and my gold, and carried into your temples my goodly pleasant things. The children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have ye sold unto the Grecians. The Africans got together with the so-called Grecians or the Europeans, and they commenced in selling the Israelites that were dwelling on the west coast of Africa in slavery. There's your slave trade right there in the Bible. Both buyers, Europeans, and sellers, Africans, saw the people traded into captivity on the African coast as outsiders. Now, why did those Africans see you as outsiders? Because you were some people that migrated and encroached on their land. They knew you were not the same exact people. The customs that you had, the way you moved, they knew you were not the same people, so they had no problem commencing in a slave trade with the Europeans. Do you be crazy to believe that Africans were selling their own people? That makes no sense at all. When the Europeans put that in the textbooks, they're using technicalities, saying Africans sold other Africans. When they're using technicalities, what they mean to say is native Africans were selling Israelites that were living in Africa. It'd be no different if somebody wrote history of 500 years from now and say there was a slave trade that happened here in America. Say black people got together and start selling white people to the Chinese. If somebody with the same mindset that the Europeans have wrote history 500 years from now, they would say Americans were selling other Americans to the Chinese. When it's two totally different nation of people living in America. You can't just say Americans sold other Americans. Two totally different people. It's the same exact scenario on the west coast of Africa. So he got together with the Egyptologists, which supplied him with the mummy heads. And what he did was conduct an extensive research on the cranial remains of the heads in Egypt, in contrast to the cranial remains of the heads in America. And what he found out is that the Negroes that were in slavery were not Africans. He found out that the skulls were two totally different types of skulls. The Negro's head was longer than the Egyptian head. The physical characteristics from the outside look similar, with the thick lips and the broad nose. But once you start delving into the real characteristics, he found out that there were two totally different people, as abolitionists and colonizationists had maintained, and that in fact, blacks had been relegated to the same servile position in ancient Egypt as in modern America. But what Dr. Morton did discover is that the Negroes that were serving slavery in America served the same position and servitude in ancient Egypt when they matched other skulls and other cranial remains in Egypt. They said these are exact matches. So what are the scholars saying? What you're going to find out is that they're saying that you are the biblical Israelites. Yes, you're the same exact people that served slavery in the land of Egypt. You're the same exact people that God sent Moses to go redeem under the hand of Pharaoh. You're the same exact people. And when you read the Bible, you'll find out that slavery is a central theme in the Bible. It's a reoccurring theme with the Israelites. The Israelites cannot run away and get away from serving slavery. It continues to happen over and over, all the way up until today. You came out of Egypt as slaves, came down into the land of Israel. No sooner as you got there, then you had the Assyrians come, capture the land of Israel, and take you and make you slaves. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria. You came out of the land of Assyria, went back to the land of Israel. Then the Babylonians came, which are the modern day Ethiopians, the Cushites, came to the land of Israel and made you slaves. So all Israel were reckoned by genealogies. And behold, they were written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah, who were carried away to Babylon for their transgression. You came out of the Babylonian captivity, went back to the land of Israel. Then the Persians came on down there, took the Israelites and made you slaves. For we were bondmen, yet our God hath not forsaken us in our bondage, but hath extended mercy unto us in the sight of the kings of Persia. You came back from the Persian Medo captivity, went back to the land of Israel, rebuilt the temple up. Then the Greeks came on down there, took you and made you slaves, to entreat them that they would take the yoke from them. For they saw that the kingdom of the Grecians did oppress Israel with servitude. After you came from the Greek captivity, you went back into the land of Israel, rebuilt the temple because the Greeks were sacrificing swine and pig on the altars. No sooner as you came back to the land of Israel, then the Romans came and had you during the time of Christ as slaves. It was so much slavery going on with the Israelites that Jeremiah himself had to ask, is Israel just put on earth just to be slaves? Is that your whole purpose? Just to be servitude to other nations? Is Israel a servant? Is he a homeborn slave? Why is he spoiled? So you might be asking yourself, if the so-called Negro is part of the 12 tribes of Israel, how in the world did you get to the west coast of Africa? And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. This is Christ right here speaking to the Israelites. He says, when you see Jerusalem compassed or surrounded by the Roman armies, then know that the desolation or the destruction of the land of Israel is getting ready to happen. The Romans getting ready to come in here and tear some stuff up. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out. And Christ says, when you see the Romans coming in, you better get ready to flee into the mountains. And what you're going to realize is that the mountains that he was talking about was the land of Africa. It was the same exact place that Mary and Joseph took Jesus when they were fleeing from Herod when he was trying to come find Jesus to kill him. They went right into Africa. And the Israelites went into Africa as well, fleeing from the Romans. In the year 65 BC, the Roman armies under General Pompey captured Jerusalem. In 70 AD, General Vespasian and his son Titus put an end to the Jewish state with great slaughter. During the period from Pompey to Julius, it has been estimated that over 1 million Jews fled into Africa, fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of black Jewish slaves. Over 1 million of you Israelites fled from the land of Israel into the land of Africa, running away from the Romans because the Romans was coming to put slaughter to the Israelites. The ones that didn't take heed to the prophecy of Christ when he said you better leave and go to the mountains, go to Africa, when they got caught by the Romans, they were taken back to Europe and sold in slavery and put in servitude. and became gladiators, put in the lions' dens. The pagans and the Romans attacked the Jews indiscriminately. Both the Jewish soldiers and the uninvolved peaceful population without mercy. As a result of this merciless attack, many Jews fled to those parts of northwest Africa known as Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and Mauritania. Many other Jews fled to other areas where Rome did not have any jurisdiction. This was to the region of the south, the Sahara Desert, and the Sudan. Grazel says, such is the explanation of how the Sahara Desert first acquired Jewish tribes, toughened by a fighting tradition and possessed of physical characteristics, black, which it is said still makes them approximate very closely the original Jewish population of Palestine. And after migrating from Israel and dwelling on the northwestern parts of Africa, after you were fighting vigorously with the Romans, you had no choice but to start migrating to the southern regions of Africa, where the Romans didn't have any jurisdiction. Because the Romans were relentless and they were adamant about putting all Israelites to death. So in order to get any type of peace, the Israelites had to start migrating to the sub-Sahara parts of Africa. The scholars know this for a fact. The biblical scholars know this for a fact. They know all the history of the Israelites and their migration patterns. Whatever may be thought of the more or less mythological traditions connected with the earliest Jews in North Africa, it is now practically an established fact that a Jewish nation, Jewish at least in faith, and perhaps too in origin, long held sway south of the Sahara. In later centuries, Jews are believed to have settled in Western Africa during the height of the Songhai, Mali, Ghana, and Kanem-Bornu empires. According to accounts from explorers of the region, several powerful Jewish families of the Songhai Empire were of Jewish origin. Some accounts place West African Jewish communities in the Andu Forest of Dahomey, south of Timbuktu. In the 1930s, these groups still maintained a Torah scroll written in Aramaic that had been burned into parchment with a hot iron instead of ink so it could not be changed. In the 1930s, the historians went over there and still found Israelites over there that didn't get captured in the slave trade, still practicing the Hebraic faith, still knowing who they were. With a Torah, which is the first 5 books of Moses, written in Aramaic. That's the ancient language. And it's a shame that they have to burn it in hot iron so the European colonialists don't come over there tampering with it and taking the evidence and trying to hide the history. It's a shame that they have to do that. It is a total shame that they have to do that. The black Jews had an advantage over the African tribes. They carried their culture, history, laws, and written records with them. The Jews made use of every opportunity. They were an industrious and skillful people. In the Jewish Ghanaian states were found kings, princes, governors, generals, secretaries, treasurers, revenue agents, judges, architects, engineers, doctors, historians, language interpreters, mathematicians, jewelers, sculptors, masons, carpenters, painters of art, goldsmiths, leather workers, potters, armorers, saddlers, blacksmith, agriculturalists, etc. Who told you that you was a bunch of Negroes running around on the west coast of Africa, butt naked, swinging from vines? Who told you that lie? You were and still are a prestigious people, a skillful people. The decline of Jewish communities of the West African Maghreb most likely began with the influx of Arab invaders into North Africa starting in 640 CE and later into West Africa in the 1300s and 14 CE. So after you had established communities and empires on the west coast of Africa, after the 7th century, that's when Muhammad and his band of thugs came down there to the west coast with the Quran in one hand and a sword in another one. And they were forcibly converting the Israelites into that nonsense Islam. Yeah, I said it, nonsense Islam, because that's not what we were dealing with. That's the Arabs' religion. That's not what we were dealing with. And that was the decline of the Hebraic community over there in the west coast of Africa. And that was the forefront in the beginning of the slave trade. Yea, and what have ye to do with me, O Tyre and Zidon, and all the coast of Palestine? Tyre, Zidon, and the coast of Palestine, those are all ancient Africans that God is referring to. Will ye render me a recompense? And if ye recompense me, swiftly and speedily will I return your recompense upon your own head. Because ye have taken my silver and my gold, and carried into your temples my goodly pleasant things. The children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have ye sold unto the Grecians. The Africans got together with the so-called Grecians or the Europeans, and they commenced in selling the Israelites that were dwelling on the west coast of Africa in slavery. There's your slave trade right there in the 7th century. That's when Muhammad and his band of thugs came down there to the west coast with the Quran in one hand and a sword in another one. And they were forcibly converting the Israelites into that nonsense Islam. Yeah, I said it, nonsense Islam, because that's not what we were dealing with. That's the Arabs' religion. That's not what we were dealing with. And that was the decline of the Hebraic community over there in the west coast of Africa. And that was the forefront in the beginning of the slave trade. Yea, and what have ye to do with me, O Tyre and Zidon, and all the coast of Palestine? Tyre, Zidon, and the coast of Palestine, those are all ancient Africans that God is referring to. Will ye render me a recompense? And if ye recompense me, swiftly and speedily will I return your recompense upon your own head. Because ye have taken my silver and my gold, and carried into your temples my goodly pleasant things. The children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have ye sold unto the Grecians. The Africans got together with the so-called Grecians or the Europeans, and they commenced in selling the Israelites that were dwelling on the west coast of Africa in slavery. There's your slave trade right there in the Bible. Both buyers, Europeans, and sellers, Africans, saw the people traded into captivity on the African coast as outsiders. Now, why did those Africans see you as outsiders? Because you were some people that migrated and encroached on their land. They knew you were not the same exact people. The customs that you had, the way you moved, they knew you were not the same people, so they had no problem commencing in a slave trade with the Europeans. Do you be crazy to believe that Africans were selling their own people? That makes no sense at all. When the Europeans put that in the textbooks, they're using technicalities, saying Africans sold other Africans. When they're using technicalities, what they mean to say is native Africans were selling Israelites that were living in Africa. It'd be no different if somebody wrote history of 500 years from now and say there was a slave trade that happened here in America. Say black people got together and start selling white people to the Chinese. If somebody with the same mindset that the Europeans have wrote history 500 years from now, they would say Americans were selling other Americans to the Chinese. When it's two totally different nation of people living in America. You can't just say Americans sold other Americans. Two totally different people. It's the same exact scenario on the west coast of Africa.
Now, before we continue, we're going to come to this book real quick, History of the Conquest of Spain by the Arab Moors by Henry Copey. This is from 1892, so you guys can see. We're in archive.org. Again, that's History of the Conquest of Spain by the Arab Moors, with a sketch of the civilization which they achieved and imparted to Europe by Henry Copey. Volume 2, 1892. This part right here is especially for all the new people, right? What is a Huguenot? I got several videos on the Huguenots. I got a 5-hour one that is very thorough on the information and their history, what they went through, and their involvement in the Americas in colonial times. And who are these people? What is their ethnicity? What is their genealogy and ancestry historically? Now we're going to start here. Page 445 of this book is literally telling us about Columbus, how he's the Christ bearer. That's what his name means, the Christ bearer, and how he left out of a Moorish port. His vessels was fitted out in that little port of Palos, which had lately been a Moorish port. His sailors were, many of them, men with Moorish blood in their veins. Columbus himself, so-called Moorish blood, most likely Sephardic Jew from Portugal. We are investigating. There's many stories of his possible real name out there, so we're investigating, but definitely seems to be he was a Sephardic Jew from Portugal. So he also had Moorish blood. All right, so many of these so-called conquistadors were so-called Moors or so-called black people, right? It has been asserted that when the Moors were driven out, thousands took refuge in the south of France, who afterwards, abhorring the Roman Catholic persecutions, became Huguenots. They became the Huguenots. It didn't say they mixed with Huguenots. They are the ones who became known as the Huguenots in history. So whenever you see Huguenot, we just read John Pintard, right? John Pintard is a Huguenot. We're going to read more about that. Yes, he was a Moor. Yes, Huguenot, so-called black man. Yes, these people, German Palatines, Thomas Nast, right? He was also a so-called black man. I'm going to show you what Benjamin Franklin had to say about them. But it tells you right here in this book who the Huguenots are, right? They never tell you this part of their history or beginnings and origins. The word Huguenot just meant a confederation, a people coming together, comrades coming together as confederates. We're going to hear from Benjamin Franklin himself. We're in this book that he actually wrote, Observations Concerning the Increase of Mankind, People and of Countries, by Benjamin Franklin. This was written in 1755, this version right here in Boston, okay, 1755. So basically he's going over some points why it's bad, all this immigration, all these foreigners, as he's calling them, Germans, Protestants and all that, Palatines, why are they coming, these Huguenots, why are we bringing them into the country? He's literally complaining. So right here in point 23, he says, and since detachment of English from Britain sent to America will have their places at home, so soon supply and increase so largely here, why should the Palatine Boers, all right, the Palatine, Thomas Nast, right, the guy who was drawing Santa Claus, he's a Palatine Boer. He suffered to swarm into our settlements, and by herding together establish their languages and manners to exclusion of ours? Why should Pennsylvania, founded by English, become a colony of aliens, who will shortly be so numerous as to Germanize us instead of our Anglifying them, Germanize, and will never adopt our language or customs any more than they can acquire our complexion? They're not even our, he's saying, they're not like me, they're dark complexion. Which leads me to add one remark, that the number of purely white people in the world is proportionally very small. In 1750s, all right, very small. It's not me, it's Benjamin Franklin telling you. Nobody is blackwashing anything. They're telling you that before the 1800s, the world was a so-called blacker place, according to Benjamin Franklin's primary source and notes. Right here, he's telling you that all of Africa was black, or tawny, right? Tawny, all right? So tawny, shout out to Drop, all right? We're in Webster's Dictionary, 1828. It says here tawny, adjective of a yellowish dark color. Yellowish dark color, like things tanned, or persons who are sunburned, or as a tawny Moor, or Spaniard, the tawny sons of Numidia, the tawny lion, all right? Dark complexion person, right? So we got Africa's black or tawny, Asia chiefly tawny, so is Asia, America exclusive of the newcomers wholly. So not part, but all of it is what? Tawny, dark complexion. And in Europe, the Spaniards, Italians, French, Russians, and Swedes are generally of what we call swarthy complexion, as are the Germans also. All right, as are the Germans also. Okay, we're gonna put swarthy right here, and we're gonna get swarthy being of a dark hue or a dusky complexion. Tawny, same thing. In warm climates, the complexion of men is universally swarthy or so-called black. The Moors, Spaniards, and Italians are more swarthier than the French, Germans, and English. Okay, who are the Moors? The Spaniards and Italians. Who are the Spanish conquistadors? Who were the Spaniards that came here? Moors, people of dark complexion. All right, their swarthy hosts were dark in all our plains. Look at this, black as the swarthy African. Swarthy means so-called black. Okay, Benjamin Franklin is letting you know that the German Palatines were so-called black. The Huguenots were Moors. These are the same people. So again, when they're telling us Santa's New York roots, who are these men, these so-called Dutch and German Palatines? Once you have a better perspective of who they are, you see things a lot differently, right? You see things a lot differently. You can't just blame the so-called white man. It's not about complexion. So remember, they would tell
Asiatic Moorish descendants of the North Gate and South Gate must nationalize.
They have fake scholars who keep getting paid off, that keep promoting these people as crayons, knowing that that makes them non-descendable. Whether it was black, green, purple.
Give me a fake scholar.
Anybody that continues to call these people of Moorish Asiatic descent black, knowing it makes them non-descendable. We're talking about a political issue of estate and birthright.
Is Dr. John Henry Clark one of those? Who are you talking
He knows that these people are Moors.
All ethnic groups in this country understand they got a nationality, because you answer to such stupid words like Negro and color and black. You have no nationality. Negro is not a nationality. Some lazy Portuguese or Spaniard took an adjective and made a noun out of it. Colored is not a nationality. Black tells you how you look, but it don't tell you who you are.
Asiatic.
Again, we as Moors of the Western empires, right, going all the way from the Horn, not the Horn, but from the Cape, all the way from the Ivory Coast, all the way up around into Mauritania, what is now Mauritania, Morocco, Tunis, Tripoli, Egypt, and then going all the way back down to the Ivory Coast, Cameroon, and then inside Mali. All of that was the western portion of the empire. So we here, as the Moors, have to understand that we are the torchbearers of that bloodline. Because after Granada, which one thing they don't tell you is that after the expulsion of Granada, all of the noblemen and people like that already had estates set up for them over here, because those estates was established for them over there. Because remember, it was our ancestors from northwestern and northern Africa that went up into what they now call Hispania, set up all those dominions as far up into the southern France, what we call the period.
It's the biggest Islamic states that was found here in Old Mexico.
In terms of the Asiatic or the old Atlantean empires, is in fact the Asiatic Moors of Barbary and the giant Asiatic Moors from Tartary. The Tartarian Empire, just like the Barbarian Empire, was peopled by Moors. Okay? Genghis Khan was a Moor. Get the book Conquest of Peru, Mexico, Talamanca, Natchez, and Telequesta. That was the book in the 13th century about the Mongolian, so-called the Tartary invasion, that basically ended with a unification treaty by which we all came together at this thing called the Battle of Anju Wat. But Anju Jat. Again, barbarian does not mean evil. Barbarian is another word for Barbary, and the Barbary powers was one of the powers that ruled the world on the left side, and then you had the Tartarian Moors running it on the right side, and we ran everybody in the middle.
And it's going to go right back to that in the end. So, Islam.
The garden of